Your Bibles to Matthew chapter 5 and place your bookmark. Matthew chapter 5 and place your bookmark there. Faith is the victory. May 2025 be a year in which we live by faith, a year which we live for our King. Thankful to Russ for his lesson this morning. He did a fine job introducing this theme. And then the task before us tonight will be to take January's subject matter, which is from Matthew chapter 5, and see what we can better do to understand it and apply it in our lives. And so that'll be our efforts tonight. It is rainy, it is wet, it is going to be miserably cold tonight, but thank you so much for being here. You have encouraged me. And I pray that you are encouraged. I pray that your faith is strengthened by being here. Thank you so much. Matthew 5, please. Matthew chapter 5. Let's begin reading verse 1. And seeing the multitudes, he went up on a mountain. And when he was seated, his disciples came to him. And he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you, when they revile and persecute you and say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. The message of Jesus Christ, the message of the Sermon on the Mount, is not simply good advice. This is part of the gospel of our King, Jesus. In fact, what this is, in some ways, is an upside-down look at the world. Or maybe even more precise and more accurate, it is a look at the world right side up. It is a look at the world through the lens of God, through the lens of our King, Jesus Christ. The Beatitudes, which is our subject matter for January and our study tonight, this, in particular, is critically important as it sets the stage for the whole sermon. It actually undermines two extremes that are pretty common. One extreme is that religion removes all discomfort. Some have the idea that if I'll just become a Christian, I'll never have problems again. Read the Beatitudes. The other extreme is that Christianity, religion in general, has nothing to offer the here and now. It is simply pie in the sky thinking. What you have is misery now, but don't worry, it'll be great one day. I say again, read the Beatitudes. Both extremes are false. Brethren, I think we lean sometimes on the second one if we're not very careful. It'll be okay when we get to heaven. True. But for the Christian, it is okay now. And we have hope of it being truly okay later. Folks, the message of the cross, the message of the Sermon on the Mount, the message of Christianity is for right now with a hope towards the future. Sometimes it is presented in such a way it's be miserable now, but don't worry, you can be joyful and happy later. That's not the point. But I need to start by doing just a little bit of this groundwork, because I think this will help us understand this a little bit better. You're looking at your text again. Look at the first line of every verse. You see it there? Blessed. And then verse 4. Blessed. And then verse 5. Blessed. It goes through this passage. Some translations use the word happy. That is a poor translation. Because in the 21st century American mind, happy is not what Jesus is talking about. Jesus is talking about something much more biblically significant. One writer said, this is what being blessed is. It is a description and a commendation of the life God approves. This is not about happy. This is not about an emotion. This is God blessing people who live God's way. So the shorthand is not happy. It is approved of by God. Now look at those passages again. Approved of by God are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. You see the point now? This is not happy. This is not emotion. This is not pie in the sky. This is not me floating around smiling like a fool. This is me content that God approves of me. Now, that's what this section is about. Being approved of by God. Not how you feel, not how you could feel, but really, to get down to it, how God feels about you. He approves or He does not approve. So this text and then this sermon, which paves out of it, is the framework for what it means to be God's people. Do you want to be approved of by God? Well, then this will give us a brief taste of how we do that. I've got 4 observations of the text, and then the lesson will be yours. And we're going to do a little heavy lifting on the front end. This will actually dovetail nicely with Russ's lesson, as you would expect, since he introduced this subject matter. If it didn't complement Russ's lesson this morning, we'd have problems. But since he more or less introduced the whole Sermon on the Mount, and I'm just preaching out of a part of it, they should work very well together. Number 1, these are all rooted in the Old Testament. Now, I don't want to do all of these, but let me explain very clearly. You could take every clause of these 12 verses and have Old Testament passages for the first clause and Old Testament passages for the second clause. Yes, it is that rich in Old Testament imagery. But I just want to highlight a few of them to give you a taste. Let's take the big one. Blessed are the poor. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the gentle. That word blessed is biblical all through the Old Testament. Let's start with Psalm 1, shall we? Psalm 1. By the way, this also helps us better understand the context in which Jesus preached and the context in which I said this is not happy, this is approved of by God. So Psalm 1, just a few verses here. Psalm 1, verse 1. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the path of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night. He shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that brings forth its fruit in its season, whose leaf also shall not wither, and whatever he does shall prosper. There are translations that say, happy is this man. It is not happy. It's approved of by God. Approved of by God is the man who doesn't walk in the paths of ungodliness, but verse 2, delights in the law. It's that man, approved of by God, that's planted like a tree and prospers wherever he goes. But brethren, don't you think when Jesus starts His iconic sermon, His gospel meeting sermon, when He's speaking to predominantly Jewish people, when He says, blessed is the man who such and such, what's ringing in their ears? I promise, the first verse of the song book of Israel. But let's go a little deeper. Psalm 32. Psalm 32. Rest assured, we're not drawing all the water out of the well. There are 45 Old Testament Beatitudes. 45 Old Testament Beatitudes. There are another 37 in the New Testament, some of which are in chapter 5 of Matthew. Psalm 32, verse 1, blessed is he whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. Blessed is the man to whom the Lord does not impute iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no deceit. Do you see the context? Do you see what's going on here? Psalm 119, please. These are the 3 big ones in the Psalms. Psalm 119. Psalm 119. Again, verses 1 and 2. Psalm 119, verses 1 and 2. Blessed are the undefiled in the way, who walk in the law of the Lord. Blessed are those who keep His testimonies, who seek Him with a whole heart. Now do you see it? Approved of by God is this person. The person who walks in the undefiled way. The person who leans on the whole testimonies of God. Folks, when Jesus says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, this is some of the context which He's using. Let's go to another one. I won't spend any time looking at the passages for this one, but back in Matthew chapter 5, notice verse 3 again. This one is stated twice in the Beatitudes. Verse 3, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Down a little further in the text to verse 10. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Well, as Russ unpacked for us this morning, saved us a little legwork tonight. Brethren, that's the context that Jesus is speaking about here. The context of David's promises, 2 Samuel 7. The context of Gideon knowing that God was king in Israel. The context of the people crying out for a king and them getting Saul. The context of a nation that collapsed in on itself and the hope of a future king, like Isaiah would write about in chapter 2 and in chapter 9 and in chapter 11. Brethren, all of this is Old Testament context. All of this is Old Testament imagery. In chapter 5 of Matthew, notice verse 8. Notice verse 8. Blessed are the poor or pure in heart, for they shall see God. That one's an interesting one. Now, there are several Old Testament passages which we could turn to at this time that would help us see some of this, but I want to refer to one. The passage I'll refer to is Exodus 33, where God is revealing Himself to Moses. Moses says, I want to see you. And God tells him, no man can see me and live. It's incredible. That promise, that statement, God ends up showing him the backside of His glory as He walks away. And yet Jesus, when He opens His mouth in the Sermon on the Mount, says that this fellow will see God. You have to wonder how's that happen? This fellow will see God. When God told Moses, no one can see me and live. We're going to come back to that one. One other statement. He says in verse 9, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Several times in the Old Testament, Israel is called the children of God. You look at Deuteronomy chapter 4 and Hosea chapter 11, verse 1, passages that remind Israel they are God's children. And here Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, this person will be called sons of God. One final one that I want to draw your attention to. Stated again a couple of times in the passage. Verse 6 of Matthew 5. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Down in verse 10. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. That idea of righteousness is important throughout the biblical context. In fact, you might recall that that's exactly what the Good Shepherd was said to do, was lead me in paths of righteousness. Psalm 23, verse 4. Brethren, this is the promise of God. In Psalm 107, please. Psalm 107. This passage is drawn from some of this imagery. Psalm 107, verse 5. And even the verse 6 of Matthew 5, they hunger and thirst for that. They hunger and thirst for righteousness. Well, here's what Psalm 107 says, verse 5. Hungry and thirsty, their soul fainted in them. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble. He delivered them out of their distresses. He led them forth by the right way, that they may go to a city for a dwelling place. Oh, that men would give thanks to the Lord for His goodness, for His wonderful works to the children of men. You see some of those same images. Here's the hungering and thirsting and the crying out for the right way. And what does Jesus say? Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness' sake. Now, let me explain something. we didn't do anything just real fancy. I would encourage you, just so that I don't beat the dead horse, because I could, and I would enjoy it. Go home, and sometime this week, when you're meditating or you're thinking about what our plan for preaching this year is all about, living for the King, I would encourage you, read these 12 verses in Matthew, and if you have a Bible with little footnotes, go look at those footnotes, because it is interconnected. Jesus is not just walking onto the scene out of nowhere and starting His sermon. He's using images and ideas and phrases that are saturated from the Old Testament, drawing together some of the beautiful ideas Russ talked about this morning. There's a coming king, there's a coming king, there's a coming king, and Jesus comes on the scene and says, I'm it. It would be a profitable study indeed. And yes, I already left off a few passages I was going to turn to. But I want you to see this. This is good. This is rooted in the Old Testament. A second observation, going back to Matthew chapter 5, and I think this is equally important. These are stated as absolutes. Back in Matthew chapter 5, I want you to see this. Notice again, just jumping through these verses. Verse 3, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Verse 4, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Verse 5, they shall inherit the earth. They shall be filled. They shall obtain mercy. They shall see God. They shall be called. Do you see it? Do you see it all through the passage? Jesus is not putting question marks in His preaching. He's putting exclamation points. They shall get this. They will get this. Folks, this is not one of these great grandiose promises where Jesus is preaching and saying, if you live right, if you pursue righteousness, you might. If you'll hunger and thirst for righteousness' sake, it's possible. He is stating emphatically, they shall, they shall, they shall. It's not a question. It is preached by Jesus Christ as an absolute. This is what they get. It is certain. It is unquestionable, folks. Furthermore, this adds more oomph. No, that's not a word, but boy, it should be. This adds more oomph to all of the New Testament. This adds more certainty to the preaching of Jesus Christ in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. This is why Paul can state so emphatically in the context of the resurrection that our laboring is not in vain in the Lord. Why? Because no amount of Christianity is put there with question marks, folks. And none of the great promises of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, our King, are put there with question marks. We need to see that, folks. In an age of constant questions, in an age of uncertainty, we can be certain. We can have confidence in our King. We can have hope in our King. But just as importantly as we're thinking about this, these promises are absolute, so too are the promises of judgment. Let's just look at the sermon now. Matthew 5, down in verse 21. Matthew 5, verse 21, you've heard it was said to those of old, you shall not murder. Whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment. Verse 22, but I say to you, whoever is angry with his brother without a cause will be in danger of the judgment. Whoever says to his brother, Raca, will be in danger of the council, but whoever says, you fool, will be in danger of hellfire. You notice, there is no asterisk, there is no question mark. Jesus is not saying, well, if you kind of mess this up and you don't behave the way you're supposed to with your brethren, you might really be in trouble. It's possible you could really jeopardize your soul. He says they will be. You will be in danger of hellfire. A little further in Matthew chapter 5. Down just a few verses. Verse 29. If you pluck your right eye, or if your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. For it is profitable for you that one of your members perish, and not that your whole body is cast into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. For it is profitable for you that one of your members perish, and not that your whole body be cast into hell. No question. No question marks here. No scratching of the head, no wondering. Stated as fact, brethren. Fast forward just a little bit further. Chapter 7, verse 13. Enter into the narrow gate. For wide is the gate, broad is the way that leads to destruction, and there are many who go in through it. How dare he say such a thing? He is God and King. Yes, he can say such a thing. No question mark, but a scary period on the end of that sentence. A little further, verse 19. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Verse 22, many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, done many wonderful works in your name? And I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. Down just a little further. Verse 27. The rain descended, the floods came, the winds blew, beat on that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. Folks, Jesus is not preaching possibilities. Jesus is not preaching plausibility. Jesus is preaching facts. We can be certain of our hope, just as we can be certain there is judgment. This sermon reminds us of that, and we need to see it. Number 3, back in chapter 5, please. These are both present and future. I want you to notice this. Now, I don't want to make a whole lot out of this, but I do want us to see it. If you'll notice again verse 3, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Verse 4, they shall be comforted. Down just a little bit further, verse 10 again, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now verse 11, blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Throughout this passage, especially if you're reading some other translations like the New American Standard or the ESV, you'll see it bounces back and forth between present terms and future terms. I think that's by design, because there are elements of both in our service to the King. One writer noted, we enjoy the first fruits now. The full harvest is yet to come. Brethren, do you see that right now? Living this way, going back to the text, living as one poor in spirit, as one who mourns, as one who is gentle, as one who hunger and thirsts for righteousness, living this way has rewards right now. And yes, it has great eternal rewards for later. But brethren, we need to see this reality. Living for God now brings rewards now. This is the good life. And what we will get in the end is a better life, the great life. But we need to see that. Now let me show that to you in the passage. Because what we have now is a taste of what will come. Russ last Sunday mentioned foretaste. It's a great word. Foretaste. Our worship is a foretaste of what heaven will be like. Surrounded in the throne of God in praise to our Father. Brethren, we get foretastes of our glory with the Father. Let me show you one. Look again at verse 8. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. It's a fascinating statement. I already highlighted Exodus 33. Where God explicitly said no one can see Him and live. In fact, go over to John chapter 1. John chapter 1, a few passages here we're going to plug in. John 1, notice what John says in his gospel account. John 1, notice verse 18. Interesting, Jesus says, they shall see God, but John in the Gospel account says, no one has seen God at any time. The only begotten Son, who is in the bosom of the Father, He has declared Him. Well, John says that no one's seen God at any time. That would complement what Exodus said about Moses and God. But Jesus said, they shall see God. Go to John 14, please. John 14. John 14, please. An interaction between Jesus and Philip here. John 14, verse 8. Philip says to the Lord, Lord, show us the Father, and it is sufficient for us. Well, that sounds a little bit like what we've been looking at, hasn't it? What does Jesus say? Have I been with you so long, and yet you have not known me, Philip? He who has seen me has seen the Father. So how can you say, show us the Father? Do you not believe that I am in the Father and the Father in me? The words that I speak to you, I do not speak on my own authority, but the Father who dwells in me does the works. Believe me that I am in the Father and the Father in me. Or else believe me for the sake of the works themselves. Now, I don't want to try to throw a confusing element here that somehow literally when they saw Jesus, they saw the Father. That's not the point. That's not Jesus' point. But there is the simple reality that Jesus promised in Matthew 5 that they shall see God. Now, who is Jesus? He's God in the flesh. That's what's so remarkable about John 1:18. No one has seen. No one has seen. But brethren, they saw Jesus. The Sermon on the Mount promises they shall see God. Well, here's the reality then, folks. We get a foretaste of that. We see by the eye of faith God and the promises through Jesus Christ. But then I want you to see this. That's the here and now. But one day, 1 John 3, please. 1 John chapter 3, please. 1 John chapter 3. One day, folks, we will see Him fully. 1 John 3, please, verse 1. Behold, what manner of love the Father has bestowed on us, that we should be called children of God. Therefore the world does not know us, because it did not know Him. Beloved, now we are children of God, and it has not yet been revealed what we shall be, but we know that when He is revealed, we shall be like Him, for we shall see Him as He is. And then Revelation 22, the very end of your Bible. We shall see Him as He is. And then the depiction in Revelation 24. Notice this. Verse 1. He showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, Revelation 22:1, proceeding out of the throne of God and of the Lamb. In the middle of its street, on either side of the river, was the tree of life, which bore 12 fruits, yielding its fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. And there shall be no more curse, but the throne of God and of the Lamb shall be in it. And His servants shall serve Him. And they shall see His face. And His name shall be on their foreheads. Brethren, the promises of the Sermon on the Mount, the promises of the Beatitude are both present and future. We get a foretaste of them now. The first fruits, and the full harvest is yet to come. And then one final observation. Back to Matthew chapter 5, please. These are attainable. If these are not attainable, if these are not doable, then the whole sermon is a wash. Better yet, our theme this year is a wash. Better yet, the New Testament is a wash. If what God is asking of us is too much, then we are wasting our time. But it's not, is it? Even as a bookend in chapter 7 of Matthew's Gospel. Matthew 7. Notice what Jesus says, verse 24. Matthew 7:24, therefore whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them. I will liken him to a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain descended, the floods came, the winds blew and beat on the house, and it did not fall, for it was founded on the rock. Do you get it though, folks? The person who hears the sayings and does them. Brethren, that would suggest rather strongly then that the entire sermon is something you can do. It's something you can achieve. It's something you can conquer. This is character traits that you can possess. There's no question that it's challenging. That's not the issue. But it is, brethren, a determination of the will. To again complement Russ's lesson this morning, you must wake up every day and choose to be this person. Just as you wake up every day and choose to hear the sayings of Jesus and do them. Brethren, that's what this sermon is all about. Can I boil this way down? Let's look at this text one more time. Verse 3. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Brethren, you can recognize your powerlessness before God. That you have nothing to offer and you rely on Him entirely. Poor in spirit. Verse 4. Blessed are those who mourn. It's not simply that you cry at a funeral, but that you grieve over sin. Can you do that? Can you mourn your sin? You can with the right heart. Verse 5. Blessed are the gentle. Another translation would say the meek. That's the idea here. Meekness, the idea that strength under control. Not weakness, but strength under control. Moses is called meek, David is called meek, and Jesus Christ is called meek. I don't think those are sissies. I don't think they're doormats. In fact, I think they are the manliest man in the Bibles. Okay? Moses, David, and Christ. Verse 6, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Can you search for the right way like a starving beggar? Like it's all that matters in life? That what I want is the right choice. Can you do that? Verse 7, blessed are the merciful. Can you be merciful like God has been? Gracious and forgiving. Giving up your rights. I'm entitled. Can you give that up? Verse 8. Blessed are the pure in heart. Can you be pure in heart? Fully devoted. No impurities. No desires there that should not be. Can you purge the system? Verse 9, blessed are the peacemakers. Sometimes that's put into a social context. I think that fits. I think that would be appropriate, but I think it's bigger than that. As one writer noted, can you choose to bring God's peace to men and women because you have received that peace personally? To think about Ephesians 2. Through Jesus Christ, you have peace with God. That's a peacemaker. Can you do that? Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. Can you be prepared for opposition and keep your faith through it? Folks, most of the generations who lived before us faced a situation like that. Could you? Well, I would suggest, brethren, that not only can you, you should. This is not good advice. This is part of the gospel. This is the look at the world the way God sees it, the way King Jesus sees it, and brethren, the way we should live it. Right side up. And yes, the Beatitudes help us with two extremes. That we have no more discomfort because we're Christians. And that, well, it's awful now, but it'll be great one day. No, brethren, Let me be very clear. The Beatitudes are for here and now. The Sermon on the Mount is for here and now. Our theme this year is for here and now. And so now, here we are. Will you be approved of by God? That's all that matters. Will you be approved of by God? This is but a taste. And hopefully this year we can talk more about being approved of by God. I want to thank you for your kind attention tonight. If you need to take that first step, the initial step to be approved of by God, this is your opportunity. And if you need to come back, this is your chance. We invite you to make it known now as we stand and as we sing.